Hi, I'm Henry Lucas, Willem Henri Lucas. Um, I'm an educator and a designer. Um, my design practice is different from others, maybe because I do not work with clients. I work with collaborators, and all my projects now are self initiated, um, which means that I'm not only the designer, but mostly the editor or the editor in chief, and also the producer to find funding for the projects that I do, and finding distributors and publishers when it comes to books. Since I grew up extremely shy as a child, and even as a little child, spoke very late and related on drawings and pointing at things, I see graphic design for me is just another way of expressing myself, like writing or speaking, and it's the preferred medium, I'd say. I think people think of graphic design as a service. Um, Designers give form to other people's thoughts and emotions. Um, and the whole thing that it actually is based on how pretty it looks is something that I am super concerned about and also am not so interested about. If you use graphic design as your voice, then it should totally be colored with your opinions and your emotions. And I prefer doing that, finding people that have the same opinions and the same things that they are caring about to work with, rather than just giving form to someone else's thoughts and opinions. I find that a difficult question. I think I know exactly why I make work. There's a lot of things that I have in common with an artist, because I always looked at my body of work that I wanted to have control over. So in the very early stages of my career, I picked topics that I was interested in that I wanted to work for. The other thing that I was convinced about was that I wanted my body of work to document who I was as a person and show per year or per decade the topics that I was interested in as a person, which is a whole different mentality than talking about your career in a different way. It's so related to how an artist look at their work, I think. So yeah, maybe I am part artist. However, I use the medium of graphic design as professional as it can be done. Like I'm fully pay attention to good typography, color, paper, what the book as a medium is and how it can give pleasure to the reader. All these things are in place. And one of the comments that I've gotten a lot, especially when I would do lectures abroad or teach there, is that people would ask me, but are you not really an artist who just uses the graphic design medium to make work? The answer could be yes. I find it really hard being trained as a graphic designer to say, oh, but I'm like an artist. I feel that is something that other people could design better. Art historians or design critics, maybe. Yeah. I think I know many people that just have a design job at a firm from 9 to 5 and that can do an assignment within the requirements of it and not be involved emotionally with either the subject matter or what's at hand. Um, and really, there's no judgment. I still think those people could use typographic skills to make text as legible as possible, or even put it in its genre. But I'm interested in the personal commitment, um, especially when you want your work to be a portrait of who you are. And I actually think my body of work is a better portrait of who I am than even meeting me in person or have one conversation with me. I think that early on in art school, I recognized that I get extremely unhappy working on assignments that I had no personal connection with. I still, to this day, cannot do it. I always thought, and certainly at that time, that was a big flaw. And then later on, I kind of realized why that was, and that it had everything to do with how I perceived the work, which did not stop me from trying to work in very commercial environments like Ogilvy and Mather, LA. But yeah, till this day, that's something I just cannot do. What I find extremely attractive in being an artist or a designer or any visual artist in that sense is that there's a strong belief that society needs it. And when things go really wrong, even more so. Like nowadays, today, in the political mess we are finding ourselves, I think this world needs philosophers and artists to hold up a mirror and to constantly bring awareness to what's going on in our world. One of the things that I find really hard to accept is that people as individuals seem to have lost a moral compass. The only way to fight it, to me, is by showing a lot of love and taking a lot of care in the work that I do right now. It's the only thing I can come up with. So as I said early on in art school, all these things came to me, which is interesting because I was so young when I got there. I started when I just turned 17. Everyone in my class was 10 years to 6 years older. I never planned anything. First of all, I hardly knew what graphic design was. I was so interested in the image. So I started with a lot of illustration work and then started doing animations and photography. Typography, I was taught typography by Karl Martens, who's an amazing influence on my work. At the time though, I found it really hard to deal with typography. Mm-hmm. Only when I got out of art school I realized what I had been taught by him and then put it in my work. So I always felt, not having planned anything at all, that I just got here, right? And took long and winding roads, not like a straight path to something. And then I reconnected with two of my classmates in art school that reminded me that everything that my practice now is, I talked about and dreamed of while in art school. And in that sense, I think it has just been a slow build-up. The biggest surprise maybe when I moved to the US, people in the Netherlands said, well, with your interest in being um, a huge part of the editorship, you'll get in trouble. That's not something that's very familiar in the US. And lo and behold, when I did my first presentation at MoCA, people were surprised about how I got so much editorial say. But then they gave me a catalog as an assignment for a show they had no clue how to deal with. And I just came up with solutions in the design for the catalog to solve that issue. And I think it's these roles are divided because people have always believed that these roles needed to be divided. I always was more interested in storytelling than the actual form it took. And so for me it was a natural thing to be having this need to be part of the storytelling. And it has not changed. Ever since I got here, people sort of accepted that I was that kind of designer. And so maybe the answer is no. Maybe I just stuck to my beliefs, and I did get a weird reputation in the Netherlands for saying no too much. Some people think I'm extremely arrogant, and it's way more me. I'm not your designer if that is what you want from me. You gotta take my opinions and my point of view towards whatever subject matter, because it's going to be important whether I want to work for you or not. Or in my case, work with you. Yeah, for me, those two tracks were at the same time.
Yeah.
Right? From early on, I had commissioned work because I had to need money for food and so on. But 30% of my income I always used to work on my art projects, and they were constantly at the same tracks. I also, even though I do not earn money with design anymore, I still do other things. Like I sew clothes, I make other things because they inform my design making, and they inform. I have a huge interest in contemporary art and installation art and video art, because they're my inspiration for design. Never was my inspiration other design work. I've always looked at design as a discipline of the arts, like dances and theater and whatever. And coming from the Netherlands, that was also the concept, right? In the Netherlands, when you are in an art school as a designer, you're basically trained as an independent designer, not really to join a big agency or find a job at an agency, but start your own practice and create your own voice. I really think, and this may sound cheap, I'm like a really avid reader. I read everything. I also have a huge love for magazines, because I think in capturing pop culture, they basically do the best job. It has always been whatever happens in the cultural world, but also what happens in the world in general. I get inspired by so many things. Movies, music, anything on the news, a conversation that I hear from strangers, basically everything. I always, it's weird because I do separate these things. Like if I, yes, I'm into sewing clothes, but I'm not a fashion designer. Yes, I have solo exhibitions with work that you cannot describe as graphic design anymore, which makes me an artist. But these things have always been, I've been always doing these things next to the design work, and so they flow in and out of each other. And now, now that I don't have commissioned work anymore, it really is my education job that will allow me to do this practice as I want. And it's an extremely luxurious position. I admit that. I think I've always had a super high production, and I think because people know my body of work that I'm allowed to do the practice as I am doing it right now. It feels extremely luxurious. In general, that's really hard to say. I think even the department that I am teaching at is teaching students to be a hybrid. I was educated as a graphic designer, which went really in depth. That had to do with, you had to have photography skills, illustration skills, and typography. You needed to be able to understand text, copy, and react to it. And nowadays that even is way more broad. You need to have an understanding of digital aspects as coding, since you need to work with programmers, you need to have some knowledge of typography, but in the time that it is taught to you, which is 4 years, you see that people will have a hard time being an expert in any of these disciplines. That will change the market completely. I'm not sure if it's for better or for worse. I already see, how I can answer this question more precisely is the future of book design. Yes, because of websites, and yes, because of the digital, there will be way less printing. Also, we're going to run out of sources as paper. That's why I feel I need to make books that people will keep as an object and not throw out. It's kind of like you don't want the tree to die twice. It also needs to focus on what its qualities are next to the digital. It's basically when television was invented, people thought radio would die out, and radio actually needed to get better. That's what's going to happen with book design. My slight worry, though, is none of the art schools that I know of in the world are educating visual editors, people that are actually book designers and editors. It's like a dying generation. And if you look at the book designers now, they're kind of all my age. And there's very, very few people in this generation that even have the interest of just doing print. And that also has to do with the knowledge of offset printing, or any print technique in general, that's being less and less because people just use their own printers and everything comes out in CMYK. In general, I think I always sort of lived in fear of not being understood, if that makes sense. So I find it, when I work, I do have in mind the user of the book or the viewer of the book. And even though there's all these hints that I put in there with ink, use of paper, the layout, the typography, that hints to the vernacular of where that subject matter lives. If it's a book on alternative galleries run by artists in LA, I want to give them form signifiers that puts them in that mindset. So there's always hope that people will pick up on these very subtle things. Like I still believe, and here comes the designer, that I have, that my job is to build a visual platform in which work of an artist will excel, or opinions of a writer will hit you the most. So it is, I still do believe in a way in the surface aspect that I can offer. It's just that that voice is almost equally strong as the message of other people.
So what do you do in the, I'm adding a question. Have you been confronted with the idea of being misunderstood or not, somebody doesn't understand what you're putting forth, or something you're delivering just doesn't quite connect with people in the way that you were hoping? How do you respond to that? What happens when you feel like you are actually not being understood?
It has not happened that much, I have to say, but I once took a huge risk on a catalog in the Netherlands about, there was, at the end of the 80s, a new genre of painters that were into painting still lifes again. Sort of went along with what was called the new wild painters. And so these modern still lifes were sort of frowned upon at that time. Abstract painting was way more acceptable. And I felt, okay, so what is the most opposite from still life paintings? And I thought the black square painted by Mondrian was that. So I actually made a catalog that had, it showed the painting, and if you flip the page, you saw a black square with the after image of the painting in it. And the pages definitely had a front and a back. Like I was literally going to talk about the back, the front of a page and the back of a page. So the back information of that artist or that painting was on the page with the black squares. There was one person, I think one of the artists, that did not like that at all. And I was way younger then, and that really, really worried me, and I was miserable for a week. And then other people said, but oh, I just loved it. It was telling me, I understood immediately what it was about. It's like, I do get evaluations from my classes that I teach, and usually they're good, but if there's one that's bad, I feel bad for a week. So I don't know. It's I do think I'm sensitive to that, and to a point. I mean, you grow out of it. you get to understand that it's relative, you know, but you can't please everybody, but the aim is to do so. Yes, so the Netherlands is actually the best country to study graphic design, and that is because of a couple of things. Every square millimeter of the Netherlands is designed, and design as an art form has been subsidized throughout the ages by the government, but also by the Queen. If I tell this story, people kind of do not believe it because it's so Kafka-like, but the Dutch government for years had a team of people, and they were called the aesthetic department. And the aesthetic department would go to all the, by now, 15 art schools. That's a lot for such a tiny country. To just look at all the graphic design departments, and whoever graduated, they would look at the work and they would put you on a list or not. Luckily, I was put on the list when I graduated. At some point, you would get a letter or a call to show your portfolio. And then you'd have to go to The Hague, where the ministry is, and they would give you an assignment for a stamp, a coin, a telephone card, whatever. So that was also the most prestigious thing that you could do. And I'm pointing this out because the Dutch also, with all graduating artists, gave new dancers, new choreographers, new theater makers grants to make new young shows, and always made sure part of that money was spent on a graphic designer. So graphic designers were hired by young choreographers, young theater makers, young musicians, name it. It became this system that made sure young talent would constantly be working and find their own clients. When you study design in the Netherlands, design was such a sophisticated profession. It was looked at as important as studying medicine. There was you did not have to explain really what it was. Growing up in that culture, you also felt that design was art, and that it was strongly related to art, and that you had to take your inspirations from art and all the other disciplines. And I don't think it was focusing much, especially in the early days, on this tight definition of what a graphic designer professionally was, and you were trained to do that profession. I think it focused way more on who are you as an artist, what medium did you choose to work in, and how can you use that medium to form your own voice. So being a designer as editor, which is funny enough a title of an MFA, I think in RISD, by Stephen Heller, here used as this like special MFA that you could go into, always was a main idea of all bachelor's degrees of graphic design. And I think that's a huge difference. So yeah, even when you go to the Rietveld nowadays, if you are in the design department, you get a degree as an artist, since graphic design is just an art discipline. My worry, if I can go back to that, where graphic design goes, that question. If I look at organizations like AIGA, they're so focused on the professional market and the commercial side of being a designer, and it just blocked out that whole section that I'm in, and that I live for, and that I actually truly believe in, and that I educate for. Which is weird because I do have to keep in mind that these people need to earn a living. But I think if you learn the trade, being a human being, being part of a community and being a part of society, I also truly believe in design from within a community, you can do that other thing as well. If you're purely trained for just giving form to someone else's opinions and thoughts, it's way harder to connect or commit as a person. So I don't know, it worries me that the whole market is just about a capitalist idea of what graphic design could be. Also because I believe it started from a very socialist point of view. It started in Bauhaus.